Hello, welcome back to the Board Games 4K YouTube channel, and this is a channel where we give you reviews, playthroughs, unboxings, and we generally like to talk a load of bollocks about tabletop gaming in general. And in this video we're going to be talking about a Mac Gerdts game. We're going to be talking about Imperial, and in this game you will be buying bonds in countries that will allow you to manipulate armies, navies, and accumulate interest that will give you points that will allow you to win the game. So in this video we're going to be giving you a very brief overview of the rules, telling you what we do like, what we don't like. Then we'll come back and we will tell you whether or not Imperial is worth your time and bother today and in the future. So remember, if you're new here, then please consider subscribing to this channel. Leave a comment in that section down below. We'll see you after this. Board Games 4K. So, Imperial. How'd you play this game? So Imperial is an economic sort of slash war game-ish type of thing. It's not really a war game, it's more economic game. There is combat in this game, so we could sort of call it a war game, right? So the way you win Imperial is that you will be taking control of different countries, trying to amass as many power points as possible and trying to get the most money. And the way that you get power points is you need to buy bonds in countries that will give you interest, that when you take a certain action that will give you power points. And when one country reaches 25 power points, you will multiply the amount of interest you got on your bonds by the section where the pawn marker is on the power track, right? And then you will also add in any cash you got, and then the player with the most victory points will be the winner of Imperial, right? So this is a rondel game. Essentially what you'll be doing, if you control any countries, that will allow you to choose which action that country is going to take next. So you'll be moving a pawn around the rondel and taking an action associated with that action space. So at the beginning of the game, depending on how many players you got, you will shuffle up the country cards and you'll deal them out to a certain amount of players. If you've got 6 players, everyone's going to get 1 each. If you've got 2 players, you're going to get 3 each. You get the idea, right? So what you do, you look on the back of the country card that you got, and you will take the bonds that the country card tells you to take. You're going to get 1 main bond and you're going to get a smaller bond, and you'll take those bonds in your hand, and also you'll keep the country cards that you acquired and you'll place them face up in front of you, because these country cards may or may not change hands throughout the course of the game. One thing you have to remember in this game, and it's a bit difficult with me because my memory is like a goldfish, probably about 7 seconds, maybe 8 seconds tops, but you've got to remember your personal cash is separate from any cash that's in the treasury of the countries, right? If you forget that, then you're an idiot. So like we said, what you'll be doing in this game, if you control any countries, and by controlling that means that you have the majority of the bonds issued by that country, you'll be able to take control of the marker that's on the rondel, right? And what you do on your turn, if you control the countries, you'll be able to move the marker on the rondel 1, 2, 3 spaces in a clockwise direction. You can also pay 2 million quid to move it an extra space up to a maximum of 6, right? So what we'll do now, we're going to run through the actions that are available to you in this game. So the first action you can take is the factory action. This is really, really simple. What you do, you pay 5 million quid into the bank, and then you'll build a factory on a relevant space of the country whose turn it is, right? So if you're Britain, for instance, you'll pay the 5 million quid, you take a factory marker and you'll place it on the relevant spot. There's 2 types of factories. You've got armament factories, which are brown and produce armaments, right? And then you've got the shipyards, which are blue, and they produce fleets. Okay, so the next action you can take is the production action, and this is where the factories that you've built in previous rounds, or the ones that appeared on the board at the start of the game, they will produce 1 unit each. Shipyards will produce fleets, and you'll place the fleet in port. You won't place it out onto the sea, that's to do with the maneuver action. And then you'll place any armaments in the region of the factory that produced them. Wow, this game sounds really, really simple, doesn't it? You know what I mean? So the next action that you can take is the import action. You'll be able to import up to 3 units at the cost of £1 million each into any territory of the country whose turn it is. You've got to remember that if there's a hostile army in any of those spaces, then you can't introduce fleets or armaments into that region. Factories won't produce if there's a hostile unit in that territory, but we'll get onto that in a little bit. So the next action, probably the action you're going to be using probably the most, is the manoeuvre action. This is where you'll be able to move your fleets and move your armaments around, right? So the first thing you've got to remember is that the territory that you control, you can move any armaments within that region for free, because there's a railroad link that goes from any province in a country to any other province, right? So that's free. So once you've done that, you can move an extra space. Each armament or fleet will be able to move one extra space. Fleets have to move into the sea from a port, and also you can hop over oceans by using a friendly fleet that's in that region. A fleet can only transport one armament once. So by using your railroad and using the fleet hopping mechanism, you could sort of move around the board pretty quickly, you know what I mean? So if you move into an unoccupied region, or a region where there's a flag or no army, then you will place one of your own flags into that region. And this is good for when you take the taxation action, which we'll get into in a little bit. Just have a little bit of patience, all right? Don't jump ahead. So now we move on to probably the most complex aspect to this game, and this is the investor action. And this is where you'll be able to use your own personal cash to buy bonds that will A, give you control of different countries, and B, sort of bump up your interest so that you can get more power points at the end of the game, right? So there's 3 stages of this action. We're going to run through it real quick, so pay attention. So if you land on the investor action, then you'll do all 3 steps. If you just passing through, a bit like Monopoly, you'll only take the last 2 phases of this action. So the first thing you do if you land on it, right, you will pay out interest, and the interest is equal to what's on the bottom of each bond you got. So you might end up with maybe just 1 million quid in interest, or if you've got the higher bonds that you've purchased, then you're going to end up with a lot more. The person who has taken the turn will always go last, so they will pay out to other players first, and if there's not enough cash to pay the other players, then they're going to have to pay out their own money, right? I know, scary shit. So the second stage of this is that if you're holding the investor card, you will get to buy bonds in a country of your choice, and all you do is you'll pay your money and you'll take the bond that you want. You can sell existing bonds that you got back to the bank and then use that cash to buy a bigger bond, but it's entirely up to you, right? And what you do after you've taken the investor action, then you will pass the investor card to the player on your left. So the first thing you could do is, if you've got a Swiss bank account, which means that you don't control any nations, then you'll be able to invest or buy bonds in a country of your choice, right? So sort of Billy No Mates mechanism for all your sad sods out there. So the final action you could take is a taxation action, and again, this is kind of like a little bit hard to get your head around, but it does make sense once you've played the game a few times, right? So again, there's 3 phases to this action, right? So the first thing you'll do is you will calculate the tax revenue you're going to get. You'll get 2 million quid for each unoccupied factory, and you'll get 1 million quid for every flag that you've got on the board. You'll add them together, and what you do once the taxation is completed, you'll mark it on the tax chart, and if you've moved the marker of that country up any spaces, you'll get a bonus of 1 million quid for each space, right? And you'll look along the side, and then you'll move the player's marker up the power track that number of spaces. So the last thing you're going to do is you're going to collect your money. You'll take the taxation sum, and then you'll deduct 1 million quid from that for every armament or fleet that you have got on the board, and the remaining amount is paid from the bank into the treasury of that country. Have you got that? So once a country hits 25 power points, what you'll do, you'll look at the section of the PowerPoint track that the country's marker is in. You'll times that by the amount of interest you got, and then you will add 1 point for every million quid that you've got, and then the player with the most victory points and the most amount of ibuprofen in their pocket will be the winner of Imperial. So what do we like about Imperial? So the first thing that we really like about this game is that there's a distinction between your own personal cash and the cash in the treasury of the countries. And this means that you are risking your own personal wealth and obviously victory points to invest in countries that may or may not stay under your control, dependent on how the game goes. You've got to be very careful as well that you're controlling the country, that there's enough cash in the kitty to pay out interest when somebody takes the investor action, because if there's not enough cash, you're going to have to pay out your own money. You're going to have to sacrifice victory points. So it's a really, really novel mechanic where there's a fundamental separation between your own personal wealth and the wealth of the country, and the two are interlinked. If you haven't got enough cash in your hand or enough cash in the treasury, then you're stuffed, right? So that's a fantastic mechanism. So the second thing that we like about Imperial, we didn't mention this in the rules overview because it is so simple. It is basically the combat is a complete piece of piss, right? You don't even have to think about combat. Basically, it's like for like. So if there's, say, 3 of your units in a sea space and there's 2 opponent units, you'll take like for like, and whoever's left over will be the winner, right? So combat is diceless, it's luckless. It's just a case of having more units than your opponent, and that gives you control of the area. We really, really like that because it doesn't bog the game down. It doesn't mean that a high player count you're waiting for combat to be resolved, like say a game like Merchants and Marauders, for instance. So yeah, combat, piece of piss, love it. So the next thing that we really like about Imperial is the way that this game starts off really, really slow, with people building up their wealth, putting money into the treasury, scrambling for control of different countries, building up fleets, trying to make people crap their pants, thinking that there's like 7 armaments in a province. And then as you build up your power points and you get to say 15, the game just explodes. And then there's this mad scramble. Everybody's trying to kick each other's asses. And it's almost like somebody lights a touch paper and the game just comes alive. And the most exciting thing about that is you never know when that touch paper is going to be lit. So the final thing that we really like about Imperial is that the rondel is constructed so that you can't do everything you want to do as quickly as you want to do it, right? Because you can only move a maximum of 6 spaces, and that's going to cost you loads and loads of money because personal cash is normally used to invest. You don't really want to be wasting money on moving around a rondel, right? That action that you want to take is always just that little bit out of reach, and it's sort of tantalisingly frustrating that you're waiting for your turn to come around and then you can only do one portion. You're hoping that in between your next turn somebody doesn't come in and scupper your plans, and that's really edge of the seat stuff on this game. Yeah, we really, really enjoy that. So what don't we like about Imperial? So the first thing that we don't like about Imperial is that the Swiss bank means that you may be sitting out of the game for quite long portions of it, right? So, and this is especially apparent in higher player counts, especially with 6, where there's no spare countries to take control of. If you lose control of a country, then generally you're going to have to take a Swiss bank account, and it's very, very difficult to wrestle the bonds off of existing players, especially with 6 players. There are times when you may just be sitting there twiddling your thumbs, hoping that one of the low-cost bonds becomes available for you to get back into the game. And it's a real shame that there is sort of this semi-player elimination in this, but it only really happens at high player counts. So the second thing that we don't like about Imperial is it looks like complete and utter shit. It looks like somebody's taken diplomacy and taken risk and then melded the two together. The board sucks and the cover looks absolutely ridiculous. I don't know what the bloke in the middle was doing. He's got an anchor tattooed on his forehead, and then you've got the bloke next to him who looks like a cross between Dick Emery and David Lynch. So I don't know what they were thinking about the artwork in this. It's like it was rushed, or it's just got that horrible blue tint to it and the really, really grimy look of the industrial era, and it doesn't really work for me. It could do with a reprint and a refresh, but there you go. That's it. A board game cannot be judged by looks alone. Right, so the next thing that we don't like about Imperial is that the map gets bloody crowded bloody quickly. And this is, again, especially apparent at 6 players, because when you're taking the production action, you're going to be placing ships in port, and especially in these sort of central regions where you've got Holland and Belgium and that, and the UK, there's simply not enough room for all of these pieces to exist. And there are times when you'll be looking at the port and you'll be thinking, well, was that fleet in port or was it not in port? It drives me out of the wall, but there you go. So the final thing that we don't like about Imperial, and again, I'm making this sound like this game's crap at 6 players, but believe me, it's not. But again, with 6 players, the turns can take a long time to come round. And remember we said about your plans being scuppered by the time it gets back to you, and this is especially apparent at 6 players because there's going to be 6 different brains taking 6 different actions, right? So, I mean, does it work at 6? Yeah, it works at 6, but it's probably best at maybe 5 players or maybe even 4 players. So to summarise, is Imperial still worth your time and bother today and in the future. So we are going to say absolutely yes. I mean, it's not everybody's cup of tea. It looks really, really depressing, but it's a superb economic slash sort of war game that is completely devoid of any kind of luck, unless you count the random distribution of the country cards at the beginning, but we're not going to count that. The result of this is that if you manage to win this game, it is absolutely, utterly deserved. It's one of them games where you really do feel like you've earned your victory. And the luckless nature of this is up there with the games like 1830 and Kalis. It does suffer at 6 players for reasons that we have banged on about for the last 15 minutes. But at the end of the day, this is simply one of the greatest economic games ever created. There is a sequel to this called Imperial 2033, which apparently is better. But we haven't played it because even after all this time, we're still finding little nuances and different strategies in this one. So Imperial is one of Mac Gerdts' finest games, and it's highly recommended by us. So there you go, that's Imperial. Remember, if you're new here, then please consider subscribing to this channel. Leave a comment in that section down below, and we'll see you next time.